When 16-year-old Tabitha Brewer disappeared, authorities assumed that she had run away with her boyfriend. But her friends and family knew better. They knew that the police were wrong. As days passed, Tabitha's parents hoped and prayed for news of her whereabouts, any sign of her location. But when her purse was found here in a dumpster on this corner, it was not the sign that they were hoping for. Tabitha's purse had been burned, its precious contents charred, falling apart, like their quickly fading hopes for her return. Tabitha had lived in the suburbs of Kansas City all her life, but she didn't spend much time here along its first major boulevard, the Paseo. However, it is here that many believe critical moments in her short life occurred. The police, her friends, and family all believe that it was here where she watched her boyfriend die, just a short walk down the street from where her purse was found. They believed, without doubt, that Tabitha encountered a monster in this home, one who killed her boyfriend and tortured her for money that she could not even access. Everyone believed it. Everyone but the jury. This is a story of gross injustice, a story of 3 teens, one terrible night, and 12 unconvinced jurors. This is the story of Tabitha Brewer. Late one night in April of 1998, Tabitha Brewer and her 18-year-old boyfriend Nicholas Travis were hanging out at her father's apartment where they were both living when Brandon Howell arrived. Brandon was a 17-year-old friend that they had met at the Shawnee Mission District Alternative School, and even though it was nearing midnight, they left together to run an errand with him. Now, what this errand was is unclear, and it sounds like maybe they were just headed to a nearby gas station to pick something up, but an errand is how it was simply described over the phone to Nick's friend Chad. Nicholas and Tabitha got into Brandon's car to run this errand, and they never returned. The next day, Tabitha's father, Tom, called around to her friends looking for her. When he spoke with Brandon, Brandon told him that he had taken them to a nearby convenience store, a Circle K, and then he had brought them back home. But there was nothing to indicate to Tom that either teen had ever returned to the apartment. And since no one else knew where they were, Tabitha and Nick were reported missing to the police. And at first, authorities assumed that the two had run away together, young lovers seeking freedom or adventure, perhaps. But soon, a discovery was made, something that suggested that Tabitha and Nick hadn't made it very far at all. Just 3 days after they were last seen, Tabitha's purse was recovered. It had been found burned inside of a trash bag in a dumpster on the corner of 55th Street and the Paseo. Inside the purse were all of the things Tabitha had taken with her: her keys, her checkbook, makeup, the jewelry that she had been wearing that day. There was a chain that Travis commonly wore, both of their scorched IDs, a lighter, and pictures of her niece and nephew, things that her family knew she would never choose to leave behind. Described as friendly and caring, 16-year-old Tabitha Brewer was known as Tabby by her friends and family. She adored children and was a loving aunt to her nieces and nephews. Tabby enjoyed hanging out, watching X-Files, and spending time with her boyfriend, Nick. Described as hardworking, helpful, and sweet, 18-year-old Nicholas Travis had moved to the Kansas City area from Iowa about 6 years earlier to live with his mother, Lynn. He was a drummer who loved music, cars, and his girlfriend, Tabitha. At first, Nick had gone to school in the same district as Tabitha, but he started taking jobs in construction to make money and eventually dropped out, picking up steady work at a sandwich shop. At some point, Tabitha dropped out too. 2 years earlier, during her freshman year of high school, Tabitha had nearly died in a car accident. Thrown from the vehicle, she had landed on the other side of the road, fracturing her skull in several places and severely cutting her left hand and knee. A wire had to be inserted into Tabitha's jaw, and her recovery had been time-consuming. After missing classwork due to the accident, Tabby had transferred to her district's alternative education program, or their AEP, and Nick had attended the alternative school too, and they had a happy group of friends there. But eager to make a living for herself, Tabitha had dropped out, and her stepmom, Donna, helped her to get a job at the mortgage company where she had worked as a secretary. Donna bragged that Tabitha could type 80 words per minute. Tabitha and Nick had been dating for more than a year at the time of their disappearances, but they had dreamed of growing up together, getting married, and starting their own family. Tabby had already picked out a name for their first baby, Destiny, if it was a girl. Maybe it was the dropping out of high school or the teenage love that made police believe that they were runaways. But the idea frustrated Nick and Tabitha's family. They had left behind a car, paychecks, and money in the bank. Desperate for answers, Tabitha's father, Tom, had spent his time calling all of her friends and family, hoping to find her. He asked her friends for all the phone numbers of anyone who might know where she was, but no one did. After Tabby's purse was found burned, his search intensified. When Tom had spoken with Brandon Howell over the phone, he had said that he had driven them to the Circle K near 75th Street and Interstate 35, and then brought them back home. But when Tom encountered Brandon in person, Brandon told Tom that he had dropped them off at the Circle K and left them there. This change in his story made Tabitha's father suspicious of Brandon. What had really happened that night? In a press release, a few weeks after her purse was recovered, authorities with the Lenexa, Kansas police force stated that they did now fear that foul play was involved. However, they said that there wasn't enough evidence to require witnesses to speak with them. Police believed that someone had done something to Tabitha and Nick, but who? Time passed painfully slowly for their families. Days passed without the teens, then weeks, and then months. Finally, that August, just days before Tabitha's 17th birthday, after nearly 4 months of searching, new evidence was found. Construction workers preparing to pour a concrete patio spotted a shoe jutting out of the ground. And in that shoe, there was a foot. The men called police, who uncovered a dead body buried approximately 6 inches under the ground in the backyard of a vacant duplex. The duplex was just 4 houses down the street from the location where they had found Tabitha's purse. Could it be one of them? Tabitha and Nick's family drove to the home and waited outside of it while police searched the area. Investigators spent a day digging up the whole backyard, dividing it into a large grid, sifting through all the dirt. They brought in cadaver dogs and uncovered additional evidence, which they declined to discuss with the media. Eventually, Nick and Tabby's families went home, worried, defeated, and without answers. 4 days later, authorities made their announcement. Using dental records, they had identified the body as 18-year-old Nicholas Travis. With several fractures to the back of his skull, his death was quickly ruled a homicide. Police told Tabitha's family that they were pursuing 12 new leads thanks to the recently uncovered evidence, and they told Rashida Creighton of the Kansas City Star that, quote, the focus of the investigation was pretty broad, but that they had several leads. Nick's father, Bill, was quoted as saying, "The police investigated quite extensively down there, and they said it wasn't gang involved or drugs or anything like that," unquote. They had uncovered bloodstains in the empty duplex, and tests showed the blood splatter and smears belonged to Nick. Tabitha's friends and family held out hope that she would be found. They printed and distributed bumper stickers that read, God will always be with you, Tabitha and Nick. They made t-shirts and flyers with the couple's photographs. Throughout 1998, investigators conducted many interviews. Funds were raised and reward money was offered for information leading to Tabitha's discovery. America's Most Wanted profiled her case, giving it wide national attention, but still, no solid leads surfaced. Her father, Tom, turned to the internet and built his own website with Tabitha's photo and details about her case. He spent his evenings online, going into Kansas City chat rooms, asking for leads and information, hoping that someone, anyone, knew something about Tabby. But no one ever did. The local ad hoc group against crime sponsored several phone-a-thons where Tabitha's family answered phone calls from tipsters. During one of them, a lead was called in that Tabitha had been buried in a specific area along Indian Creek, but police searched it with cadaver dogs and didn't find anything. Tabby's family searched too, and also found nothing. By this time, police had followed all their leads, narrowed down their theories, and zeroed in on a suspect, someone involved in the case from the very beginning. Investigators had identified Brandon Howell as a person of interest early on in the investigation. At 17 years old, Brandon already had a lengthy criminal history. He had been prosecuted for theft, criminal damage, battery, and aggravated battery. He had been the last person seen with the couple, and when police had taken a look at his car, they had noted a scuff mark on the inside of his trunk, a scuff mark that looked a lot like a shoe print. Additionally, they had connected him to the vacant duplex where Nicholas's body had been found. The owner of the home, a woman named Willa Bird, had been a friend of Brandon's father, and he had been assisting with renovations while she prepared to move in. However, no forensic evidence had been uncovered to tie Brandon to Nicholas's body. Stuck with strong suspicions but no solid proof, police waited. In December of 1998, Steve Gravel of the Cedar Rapids Gazette asked Detective Russ Dykstra of the Kansas City Police Department about Nick's murder, and he told the journalist, "It's one of those investigations where investigators believe they know who the suspect is, but they're burdened with proving it." The police felt they had enough to charge their suspect, said Nick's father, Bill, but the prosecutor felt that there wasn't enough evidence. So Tabitha's mom, Brenda, wrote a letter to Brandon. She didn't make any accusations, but she did want him to know what kind of grief she was experiencing. She told Mike Hendricks of the Kansas City Star, "I wrote him a letter to tell him how it was with me, how I missed her being here at Christmas time, and how I thought about her so much at her birthday," unquote. She thought maybe Brandon would feel compassion for a mother that was struggling with the pain of wondering every day whether or not her daughter's body would ever be found. But Brandon never wrote back. The next April, on the anniversary of Tabitha and Nick's disappearance, their families put up flowers and blue ribbons all over the town of Shawnee in their remembrance. Later that year, 18 months after Nicholas and Tabitha disappeared, Brandon and two other men entered a Gardner, Kansas apartment armed with a shotgun and a handgun. They spent several hours threatening and torturing the apartment's occupants, demanding drugs and money. They cut the phone lines, beheaded the couple's cat, and cut one of the victim's hands crudely with a butcher knife. Brandon was subsequently arrested and convicted of aggravated kidnapping, aggravated assault, attempted aggravated robbery, and animal cruelty. But even from behind bars, Brandon remained silent about Nicholas and Tabitha. That first year or two, whenever they heard of a body found, Tabitha's parents and step-parents would drop whatever they were doing and race to the location of the deceased, hoping for some answers. But they never got any. Tabitha's mom, Brenda, called it hell. She said, quote, "Every time we hear about a body, we quit breathing. I'm hoping it's her. so we can put some closure on it." End quote. But as the years pass, though their hope still persists, their urgency fades. After so much disappointment, years of expectations and of optimism, the family no longer runs to the location of unidentified bodies. Thinking back on it, Tabby's stepmom said, "We were nuts. We were crazy." In 2001, 3 years into the investigation, Detective Everett Babcock took over the case. Tabitha's dad, Tom Brewer, praised Detective Babcock's work, calling him their biggest support and saying, quote, "He took over and was relentless. He wouldn't let it go." Babcock is known for his tenacity. His former supervisor, Homicide Sergeant Dave Bernard, spoke of him saying, "If I ever got murdered, I would want him on my case. I'm absolutely serious." When Detective Babcock took over, he brought his fresh eyes and determination, interviewing and re-interviewing hundreds of people, even turning up new physical evidence. The case file grew to over 1,000 pages. With Brandon in jail, witnesses were less fearful about coming forward. After years of silence, new leads were starting to surface. Many of the informants had been teens at the time of the murders, reluctant to share details with adults and mistrustful of law enforcement. "They were a lot more forthcoming when I re-interviewed them," said Detective Babcock. A witness told him that one evening, while outside of the duplex, he had heard Tabitha's voice from inside. He also said he later heard a man and woman's screams and saw Brandon come out of the home wearing a bloody shirt. A separate informant said that 2 days before Tabitha and Nick disappeared, that Brandon had talked about his plans to, quote, "lure a guy and a girl with a big bank account to a hotel room where he planned on holding one of them hostage and forcing the other to withdraw money from a bank." The witness told police that Brandon's plans included killing them in the bathtub. Tabitha had received a $40,000 settlement following her bad car accident, but the money was held in a trust, and she didn't have any access to it. Could this money be the motive for her and Nicholas's deaths? In 2006, Brandon was still serving a 12-year sentence for his 1999 home invasion. 8 years had passed since Tabitha and Nick were last seen alive. Although the case was circumstantial, prosecutors now thought that they had the evidence significant enough to pursue charges. "It was a case we felt we needed to try," said Assistant Prosecuting Attorney James Knatzar. If convicted, Brandon faced a life sentence. While seeing the charges finally laid out pleased Detective Babcock, he said to reporters, "I'd really like to see Tabitha's body found. That's really important to me." Jackson County Prosecutor Mike Sanders had prosecuted cases without a victim's body before, and he told the media that circumstantial evidence is sometimes better than direct evidence. The trial didn't begin until 3 years later, in the spring of 2009. Assistant Jackson County Prosecutor Teresa Moore opened by saying that testimony from Nick and Tabby's friends, as well as jailhouse informants, would prove that Brandon Howell was behind both of their murders. Prosecutor Moore noted that Nick's body had been recovered from a duplex where Brandon had worked with his father, and a woman testified that Brandon had once threatened her, saying, quote, "I'll do to you like I did to Tabitha." Defense attorney Matt Johnson said that Howell had been cooperative, speaking with families from the very beginning and allowing a search of his car. Prosecutors presented a witness who testified that Brandon had tried to talk him into assisting with the murders. Brandon had discussed his plan to rob the two teens, cut them up in a bathtub, and dispose of the remains in a river via suitcases weighed down to sink with heavy rocks. Police even found a woman that testified that she had seen a man that looked like Brandon driving a car that looked like Brandon's, disposing of the trash bag that was later found to contain Tabitha's purse. Several witnesses testified that he had left with the teens that April night, and no one had seen them since. However, in the case of Tabitha, there was no body. Brandon's defense attorney claimed that Tabitha and Nick's families had become too involved in the case and too focused early on in their pursuit of Brandon. Tabitha's dad was called to the stand, and Tom testified that yes, he had talked to Brandon twice early on in the investigation. He had been frustrated when police behaved as if Tabitha and Nick were runaways and had only wanted to know where they were. Quote, "I was trying to find out what happened to Tabitha," he said. Tabitha's half-brother Gordon testified that he had talked to people who lived here along the Paseo after Tabitha's purse had been found. Also, frustrated with a lack of answers, he admitted that he had considered kidnapping Brandon to force him to talk about what had happened that last night that Tabitha and Nick were seen. Tom denied ever planning to assault Brandon, who did not take the stand in his own defense. During closing arguments, defense attorney Kurt Weingartner told jurors that Brandon was innocent and accused the state's witnesses of being snitches, looking to escape their own legal problems. Weingartner said that police pursued Brandon as their suspect due to the single-minded devotion of Tabitha's family, and said that her family overreacted and interfered with the investigation by questioning witnesses before police did. But what family wouldn't talk to everyone they could in an attempt to find their missing child? Assistant Jackson County Prosecutor Teresa Moore closed her argument by saying that all of the evidence in the case pointed to Brandon Howell and nobody else. After just 5 hours of deliberations, the jury made their decision. Brandon Howell was found not guilty. Stunned, Tabitha's friends, family members, and their supporters filed out of the courtroom quietly. Tabitha's mom cried and told the media justice was not served. Had a 17-year-old high school dropout really killed 2 teens over a payout that he could not obtain and gotten away with it? Or had he been innocent the whole time? Had a family's desire to find their missing daughter by talking to her friends really interfered with a police investigation and Tabitha's chances of justice? Brandon Howell wasn't quite free to go. He was still serving a prison sentence for that home invasion, and he wasn't paroled for another several years. Unfortunately, it wasn't long after his release that Brandon proved himself to be a monster, just like they had alleged. It was fall of 2014, 5.5 years since Brandon had been acquitted for Nick and Tabitha's murders. A call came in to 911 midday on a Tuesday. "Help," the desperate woman said on the other line. At 1 East Woodbridge Lane, she recited her address. "Shotgun" was the only other words she got out. Police arrived to the typically quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac and a scene of complete carnage. 3 people had been shot dead and 2 others severely beaten. Witnesses told authorities that after hearing several gunshots, they had seen a Toyota Highlander owned by one of the victims drive away from the scene. Brandon was found that night on foot, not far from the abandoned Highlander, with a shotgun and the keys to the stolen vehicle in his pockets. When the elderly couple that he had beaten died at the hospital from their injuries, Brandon was charged with 5 counts of murder, in addition to a dozen other crimes. George and Anna Taylor, Susan Shoecrown, Lorraine Hurst, and her son Daryl Hurst had all lost their lives in the crime spree. Brandon went to trial and was found guilty in April of 2019. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without parole. Brandon's motive for the attack? Investigators determined that it had been the Taylor's classic car, a Jaguar, which he had been hoping to steal but apparently been unable to start. Brandon had shot at anyone who happened to be outside as he fled the neighborhood in the Taylor's other vehicle, the Highlander. 5 lives ended for an SUV that he hadn't even wanted and had abandoned after just a few hours. Behind bars for the rest of his life, Brandon can no longer hurt, steal, or kill innocent citizens. He can't take as he pleases. But I believe that if he chose, that he could give answers and resolution to Tabitha Brewer's family. I believe that Brandon knows what happened to Tabitha that night and where she is today. But even now, years into his life sentence, Brandon Howell remains silent. For a long time, Tabitha's mom, Brenda, has believed that Tabitha is dead. She had a headstone made to honor her memory. It sits in Brenda's backyard, outside of what had been Tabitha's bedroom. Brenda told Kansas City Star journalist Christine Vandell, "I just wish that somebody, after all these years, would bring her home." 5 years into their loss, Tabitha's dad, Tom Brewer, said to Kansas City Star journalist James Hart, "There is no closure to losing your daughter. How can you close that? How can you close that part of your life?" Born in 1981, Tabitha would be in her 40s today. This is an age-progressed image of her. When she went missing, she was 5'7", 115 pounds. She had brown hair, brown eyes, scars on her left knee, left hand, and under her right eye. Any information about Tabitha's whereabouts should be directed to the Shawnee, Kansas Police Department.